Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections here in Canada. I look forward to our time together. This is us, Canadian Small Churches in Ministry and in Action podcast. And today we have, I'll call it a repeat guest. I enjoyed the previous time we had together, and now we get to return and continue in conversation with our special guest for the day. And I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll go from there.
Well, my name is Paul Warnock, and I'm a pastor in Alberta, actually, and I'm in my fourth pastorate, if I can put it that way. I pastored my first church about 10 and a half years up in the Peace River country, and then I pastored down east of Three Hills about an hour in Hannah for over 16 years. And then I had a sabbatical after that, which I paid for. I just needed a break, so I took 16 months off, and then I got into transitional work, and I did one helped one church for just over 2 years, and I'm starting into a second church now, just beginning January 1st. So I actually just get to walk to work now, which is a real blessing because the first church I helped transitional work, I drove over an hour to get there, 105K exactly from door to door. So this is kind of nice. I get to walk to work. It's 5 blocks away, and I'm looking forward to the next couple of years here.
Yeah. Well, you've encountered over decades time, I guess I'll call it, the opportunity to see what it's like to be in the pastorate, small churches, how you deal with life. And so today we wanted to talk a little bit about rest and relaxation. I guess Sabbathing would be a nice word for it. Would that work for you if we called it Sabbathing, or do we need, well, maybe it's broader than that, but.
Well, I think Sabbath is a key concept in this whole thing of rest and renewal. And pastors aren't very good at practicing Sabbath, I think, for the most part, and partly because maybe a lot of guys I've talked with, and I've been through this myself, and Ron, you probably understand this too. You take one day off a week and you work 6 days, and I don't think that's helped anybody as a pastor to practice good Sabbath practices, because our day off becomes a work day, just don't get paid for doing, right? So actually, the church I just finished with the last couple of years, because I was driving that far, I wasn't there 3 days a week. So one day a week I'd spend at home in my office, preparing my sermon, and then I had 2 days off. So that's the first time in my life I've had 2 days back to back off every single week. And I'll tell you, what a blessing! Really good, because you actually could have a day which was Sabbath, and then a day to get your work done at home. So that's been really, really good, and I've carried that practice on now that I live right in the community where I'm serving. And 2 days off a week, it's very, very nice.
Well, let me ask another question. Sabbathing is, well, rest and renewal, I think, has been a topic in our society for the last while, and particularly as we've gone through the last few years. And it seems to be more touching on, how will I put it? People's self-esteem, keeping yourself good. But then the question arises for me, what part does God play in Sabbathing?
Mm-hmm. Well, the whole idea was his in the first place.
Well, I guess it was, wasn't it?
And, if we read our Bible correctly, I think, I think part of it is we don't give ourselves permission to believe what we actually say we believe. And somebody said, your real theology is not the theology you say, it's the theology you live. And so sometimes as pastors, we're really good at telling people these are all the right things to do, but we haven't modeled it ourselves. And I read an interesting comment, and I think it's probably in that book that I sent you, about God doesn't say do this. He says do what I do. He he actually does the things he tells us to do. And that's a helpful idea to get into our heads that, he never asks us to do something that he isn't willing to do himself. So God took a Sabbath, and not because he lacks power or anything else, but because it's a good thing to rest. And when we actually take time to rest, we're actually doing what Paul says, we're supposed to be imitators of God. And so getting that little thing in our heads, like we if we're going to be faithful to Christ, we actually have to do what he did, not just do what he said. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes perfect sense to me. And yeah, I think if we follow through on what God says, we would be in much better shape in both in our society and within our churches too. Yeah, we just need to step out and do it, I think.
And like I point out in the material I sent you to look at, we've bought into this, Max Weber's thing about Protestant work ethic and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And we've tied a lot of our worth to what we do. And productivity, that's a measure of how valued we are. And
Mhm.
God doesn't measure our value that way. He doesn't say, well, you did this much work this week. Good. Now you can have a little bit of time off to compensate for having all that work done. He's not at all like that. He gives us things to do, but then he also tells us let it go for a while because I'm still in control of what's going on in life in the world. And some of the lies that we believe, like I heard a guy say, well, it was actually Jeremy Peters, I think, talking about this several years ago, one of our pastors' retreats, and he said, we have to counter the lie we're hearing with the truth and stop believing the lie. And one of the lies of our cultures, and you ask people, so what do you have to? Well, all the string up all the stuff they're doing, and no one ever says, well, I took today just to go fishing. It's always about productivity, and my value is tied to my productivity. And God does not value us according to our productivity, because if He did, we'd all be in deep weeds. Because you can never produce enough
No.
to merit favor. So work is it's not part of the curse. It's one of the blessings of creation, but it's a blessing. It's a blessing. It's not the blessing. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can understand the rest is also part of being faithful to Christ, I think that is a good place to start. God doesn't want to be involved in our lives that way.
If I was to ask you, uh, as you've encountered various pastors and in many different places, what do you think are the greatest stresses and fatigues that you're finding in small church pastors and leaders at this point?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the expert. I'm an expert on me, and I do find resonance when I talk with guys, but pastors. I think, especially for small church pastors, solo pastors, um, one of the biggest pressures is deadlines.
Mm.
And so, like as a pastor, my primary job is to preach. Every Sunday I have to have a sermon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that Sunday, that it comes with great regularity.
Funny thing, yeah.
Every 7 days there's a Sunday, and it just doesn't work to show up on a Sunday and say, well, I just didn't get around to it this week, or I didn't feel up to it this week. Like, you still have to have something ready and
Mm-hmm.
not be slipshod and sloppy. Like, you need to have done a fairly decent job. So that's a pretty steady pressure.
That is steady, yeah.
Like you don't ever get to take a pass. You can't have you can't even hardly have a sick day. I mean, you're expected to be there. That's
Mm-hmm.
your responsibilities to put food on the table for the people. And so, that's a pretty big one, I think, pressure that a lot of guys feel. And especially if you're somebody that's not maybe naturally gifted, or that's not your primary
Yeah.
gift, in terms of ministries, is teaching and preaching. And so that'd be a big one. I think just, again, small church stuff, rural church stuff, wearing a lot of hats.
Yes. Yeah.
You're the administrator, Sometimes you're the secretary. Um, you're the lawn care person,
Mm-hmm.
cobbler person. You manage the Christian education. Like you oversee that, and you work. You got all these different hats plus your own personal life. You're a husband, you're a father, or whatever. Maybe you're involved in the community, and so you got a lot of stuff you're doing. You're juggling a lot of different
Yeah.
balls, and that that can be quite fatiguing, actually.
Yeah.
Especially then, if you add into that mix, if you have a little bit of conflict going on in your church, it consumes an enormous amount of emotional energy, and there's really no place you can go to get away from that. Like you can leave town for the day, but it's always with you. Like those kind of things. Working with volunteers sometimes
Yeah.
draining. Not because it's not, usually the people who do volunteer are
Yeah.
well-meaning people, but sometimes, in my experience has been, sometimes, you ask for volunteers, and I had one person say to me, well, we want you to come and actually just personally ask us and kind of hold our hand and make us feel really good. And then we might volunteer. And I'm going, well, wow, like I'm trying to manage a lot of stuff here, and I just need people to step up and say, hey, I'm willing to do stuff. And it's not that you don't appreciate it, you do, but
Mm-hmm.
to have to spend a lot of time recruiting, that can be quite a pressure for a pastor in this,
Yeah.
especially when you have limited people resources. So you're trying to protect people from doing too much. And I tell my congregations, one of my jobs is to protect you from doing too much, because the willing horse gets the work, that's the old 80-20 principle. 20% of people do 80% of the work. And so, part of my job is, as a paid guy, you go, well, I'll take on a little bit more so you guys don't have to be doing so much because you also have work commitments and family commitments and community
Mm-hmm.
commitments. You want to protect them a little bit. So that adds to the pressure sometimes. And you do that long enough, you do start to feel tired. It's just, that's
Yeah.
the course. And what else? So financial pressures.
Oh, yeah.
There are actually a significant number of pastors who are bivocational.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to manage all the work of the churches as a full-time job on kind of half the hours you need to do it. And so you're always juggling. You're always like, okay, what gets a priority now?
Yeah.
What do I put on hold till a different time? So there's that whole thing. Violated boundaries. If, if like we all need to have boundaries, but as pastors, we're not very good sometimes at making boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then boundaries we have get violated. And well, who do you talk to about that?
Yeah.
How do you maintain a boundary when there's obviously a desperate need here or whatever, and you go, well, I guess I'll sacrifice my day off to look after this issue, or I'll sacrifice family time to look after this issue. So there's those kinds of things. Relationship issues. So I talk about conflict management. If there's conflict in the church and it doesn't happen
Well, yeah,
much,
particularly small churches, where its relationship is very important. That's just,
yeah.
yeah, stands out.
One of the statistics I've read is that it's usually when a pastor leaves the church because of conflict, it's usually less than 5% of the people that he has conflict with. So it's not
Mm.
very many. Might be one or two people, but just find you've had enough. It's like, you know what, I'm done. Like,
Yeah.
I can't sustain this. I can't live with this anymore. So yeah, that kind of stuff. And then that kind of gets into another topic which we want to talk about is compassion fatigue. And in a small church, you're the go-to person. People need to talk to somebody. Often you're the one they want to come talk to. So when there's a funeral to be done, guess what? You get to do the funeral.
Yep.
Very often it's people that you know and people that you come to love. And you're saying goodbye, but you don't get a day off or a week off for compassionate leave to, grieve. Um, my wife's a nurse, and she had one week where she had two long-term clients died and
Mm.
unexpectedly. And it's like, she shows up at their place 10 in the morning, a home care nurse, to do their care, and she walks in the door and they're dead. You know,
Yeah.
you gotta wait for the police to come and all that, and then on to the next call. You don't have time to just go home and cry because you knew these people, you had many good conversations with them, and you got to keep on going. You got to keep on going. And I know as a pastor, there's been some years where I remember one year I had like 5 funerals within like, I think 4 or 5 months.
Mm.
And most people that I had known, I had good relationships with. And it was just kind of like, it just takes a toll, just that whole thing of just, and then you're always giving out. And then it's not just deaths in the family kind of thing. It's also people going through traumatic experiences, or sometimes community people that come to you because, their kid committed suicide or whatever it is. And so you're always, dealing with that compassion fatigue is what they call it. And actually all the serving professions, like all the caring professions, deal with this. And I did a actually I did a workshop for people in our congregation a few years back. And one of the interesting things I found was veterinarians. You'd think veterinarians? Well, yeah,
Mm.
like one of the high suicide rates was veterinarians
Oh.
because they have so often have to give bad news to people about their pet, their loved one, and it's just like the burnout rate and the stress rate for veterinarians is very very high. Because
Hmm.
you're often if you're big animal vet, you're dealing with people's livelihoods, and if it's people's pets, well, some pets are more dear than children. So, like
Hmm.
it's very interesting. This whole compassion fatigue thing, just what a drain it can be on a person. And we don't often talk about that because, well, we just don't. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've given a good overview of a number of the stresses. Um, Let me ask you the question. Uh, we want to take steps towards getting out of that fatigue and stress and back into a renewal and rest. What would be some steps that you would suggest we take?
Well, I think the place to start is to actually recognize that it's a problem. To name it for what it is.
Hmm.
Fatigue, it is stress, and not kind of redefine it as being, well, I'm being lazy, or um, if I was really spirit filled and all the rest, then I wouldn't have this problem or whatever. Like, just
Hmm.
recognize we're limited editions. You know, we are limited editions,
Yeah.
and that means that we are limited, and it means that we're finite, and we have to recognize that. And so that, I think that's the first thing, is just to just name it what
Yeah.
it
Just
is.
name it. Yeah.
Tired. And I know one church I was in, I told them, I said, like, probably 3 or 4 years before I left, I says, guys, I'm just really tired. Like, I need to have some kind of extended break. Didn't happen, but I was starting to, I had to identify that and realize, and then make some allowances in my life for being extremely fatigued. And I think it's hard for us to do that as pastors. We're people pleasers often, and
Hmm.
we're we really want to make people happy,
Yeah.
and then also, we have, I think, a misconception about what God expects, and we want to keep God happy. Like the little kid said, if there's one person you don't want mad at you, it's God. You know. So sometimes we allow those faulty ways of thinking to influence us, but we have to actually realize we are limited editions. We are finite. We get tired, and
Hmm.
it's okay to be tired. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to have fatigue, but then deal with it in a way that's constructive and helpful. So, some things a person could do maybe is just maybe find someone who can advocate for it. If you don't feel you can advocate for yourself, maybe you need to have like a denominational leader who gives oversight to your church to come in and say, you know what, we can see that Paul is really tired, and what can we do to help him?
Hmm.
Because one of the things I'm fairly convinced of is that longevity in ministry is actually good for churches as well as for pastors. So if we
Yes.
facilitate that, um, it's way better to take, to work with the guy you got who maybe knows this congregation really well, and he's got inroads in our community now because he's been around, he's trusted, all that. It's better to keep that guy than to go find a new guy who might not fit. you know. Like, if you've been around for a while, you probably are a pretty good fit for the community. So
Hmm.
I'd say, like, find somebody to advocate for you, whether it's maybe there's somebody in your church who
Yeah.
you feel you can trust to do that, or a denominational leader. Um, Maybe you just need to get your doctor to say, you know what,
Yeah.
this
The
might,
old doctor's note, it's a good thing.
yeah, you're excused from work for the next 3 weeks or
Yeah.
whatever. So there's that, establishing appropriate boundaries and then maintaining them. Um, One of the things that I've done, like I'm not a counselor, like I don't do counseling. And
Mhm.
I told congregation right up front, like I don't do counseling. I mean, I'll sit and listen to you one time probably, if you got something you want to talk about. But aside from giving you biblical input and just wisdom that I gained from life, I'm not a counselor. I'm not trained to do that. I don't want to do that. Being a counselor driving me up the walls. I'm
Hmm.
not a counselor. I'm a teacher. And so that's what I try to focus on the most. And in my current role, I'm given the job of dealing with conflict, you
Hmm.
know, resolve. So, like I have some specific things that this is what I think I'm supposed to be doing. And so I draw boundaries. So I don't do these other things. And it's no
Yeah.
slight. It's just I'm going to be who I am, and that's where I can best help you. So the boundary thing, um, knowing your purpose, you know,
Yes.
what did God actually call you to do? And I'm very thankful for people I've had in my life who affirmed God's calling in my life. And going back to Dr. Sage, Dr. Dom,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and Cook. So those guys, like they were big in my life in terms of saying, we see this in you. And Paul Maxwell, you might know Paul
Hmm.
Maxwell,
Yeah.
and Ted Rendell. Like I've had some really significant people in my life that have said, we see this in you. And and then congregants who say, we see this in
Hmm.
you. And it's very affirming, but it also gives you freedom because, yeah, that's actually who I am. And so to focus on the things you do well. And
Yeah.
John Maxwell talks about that actually in his leadership stuff. He says, if you're like an 8 or a 9 in something, that's where you should spend your time. You spend your time trying to get where you're an area where you're a 3 and get that up to a 4. It takes tons more energy than to just be what you actually are. And so I
Yeah.
think there's truth there, and it's good for us to understand that. And then you might just have to be prepared to move, find a
Right.
different situation. If where you're at is there's no resolution to the issue you're dealing with, the fatigue or whatever, maybe it's time for you to consider going somewhere else and maybe having a good break in between. Like I would counsel pastors and like take a break in between churches.
Yeah.
Like too many guys, they feel like, well, I have to have the paycheck, whatever. You know, sometimes you can get good severance packages from the church, especially if they fire you without cause. But EI is there for us Canadians. Like we
Yeah.
have EI to cover us. Like the last 4 months of this past year, I collected EI because I'm entitled to it, and
Hmm.
I had 4 months off to get done some projects I haven't been able to get done the last
Yeah.
3 years in our house. So, like that helped. My wife works, so that a little more burden on her, but just to have that break in between to give yourself time to to just kind of get back on your feet
Yeah.
and to kind of figure out which end is up and maybe to recalibrate and push the reset button and trust that God will actually look after you during that
Hmm.
space in between. You know, that'd be maybe some practical things. There's some of
Yeah.
those illustrations I use in the book that I sent you. There's there's the principle of balance. And the
Right.
principle
Yeah.
of function. Richard Swensson's book Margins, like that's a fantastic book. Like learning how to live with some margin in your life, like
Yeah.
that's a really really good thing.
Yeah.
Uh, one illustration I really like is of the fountain, three-tiered fountain. How do you fill the bottom bowl of a three-tiered fountain? Well, you can run around getting a bucket and pouring it in, but kind of the best, the most natural way is just to have that top fountain overflowing.
Hmm.
then it flows down to the next one and then to the next one. And eventually the bottom one gets full. And I think a lot of us in ministry, we're so busy trying to fill the third fountain, we forget to fill the first one, the first
Right.
love. And when we're relating, our relationship with God is what it should be. And we're getting infilled by him, and when our relationships with in our marriages and stuff are healthy, and Paul talks about that in his qualifications for leadership,
Yeah.
you've got to be leading your home properly. So, you work from the inside out. And so if there's overflow happening, I don't think you're going to feel the stress levels, fatigue levels that perhaps you would otherwise. And so just to be looking, that self-care thing that we started talking about at the beginning, it's quite important actually,
Mm-hmm.
not a secular model, it's actually a biblical model. So.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. Yeah, I think we've left that aside and not cared for ourselves and become, just lost life, period. I guess that'd be a good way to put it. Yeah.
And one thing I just was thinking about this morning, what percentage of pastors are introverts? Well, I just Googled it.
Okay.
Google knows everything.
Yes.
It's a little lower than what I thought it was, but between 25 and 40% of pastors are introverts. So
Mm-hmm.
that's very interesting. So that means that like an introvert they get their energy from being able to be alone.
Right.
And, it's kind of an internally refreshed kind of a deal. So if you're pastor, vocationally, you have to be an extrovert.
It helps. Yes.
But if you're an introvert, so this past week for me, I'm spending a lot of time listening to people and hearing their stories right now.
Mm-hmm.
The first few weeks in this church. And I spent a lot of time during my work week listening to people's like hours every day, just, doing very intense listening. And then I spent, 12 hours on Saturday getting ready for Sunday, 6 hours straight of writing. And then on Sunday we had, my sermon was longer this week than usual. But there was a study I read one time said that 1 hour of preaching, in terms of measured stress and intensity, 1 hour of preaching is equal to 8 hours of 8 hours of mental labor or 12 hours of physical labor.
Wow.
If you preach a 1 hour sermon, in terms of the effect, the toll it takes in your body is that like you're working 12 hours jackhammering out in the street. That's
Mm-hmm.
how much it takes out of you. So, having this week as an introvert of spending time just talking to people, listening to people all week long, and then spending intense amounts of time preparing and then preaching, and then we had a potluck afterwards.
Oh, of course.
And then I stuck around till 3 o'clock because I'm going to close the doors, but there's people wanting to talk, so I'm talking till 3. And it's like I was dead, like I was exhausted come Sunday night, And like for people who are introverts, that's something we have to deal with. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't get energized. I mean, we like people, but that's not where where we get energized. It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to our little quiet corner,
Yep.
music or whatever it is we do, to get re-energized. And there's an interesting thing that came. This was an article that was, I think, in maybe Christianity Today, but it's talking about this is in 2021, November 2021. Says the pastors aren't all right. 38% consider leaving ministry. And so that's what triggered my thought about, I wonder how many people are introverts in ministry.
Yeah.
So just about the same number. So I wonder, is it the introverts or maybe it's the extroverts that are, because with COVID, they were all locked in their offices. Maybe that's why they're leaving, because they didn't have people time, but introverts.
Right. Yeah.
I like this, Anyways, yeah, just that thing about introverts, I found that quite interesting because I'm an introvert. My whole family are introverts actually. And,
Mm-hmm.
we like people, but in limited doses.
Yeah. They wear on you even though they're good for you. And yeah, I get that. I've tried to learn to be how will I call it? A trained extrovert.
Yeah.
And, as I get older, I enjoy it more and more being extroverted, but it's been work. And yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like people, I genuinely do, but
Yep.
there comes a point, like my daughter says, I'm peopled out.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we've come to about the end here, but I do have that one question that I like to ask people. If you could give a piece of advice to a small church pastor or leader, what would that piece of advice be, particularly as they want to head into a path of rest and renewal? Now, you've talked a lot about a lot of things and excellent stuff. If you had one piece of advice, what would you give?
I think the thing I found most helpful, and this is something that came out of my own thinking and experience, that whole idea of the fountain, the three-tiered fountain, and we live from the inside out.
Mm,
If the inside is healthy and we're paying attention, it's going to have ramifications moving outward. You know, if you think of a bullseye, for example, you get the bullseye, you know, you live from the inside out. So the ripple effect goes outward. And if it's healthy in the middle, in the core of your being, it's going to have an effect on all of your life. And to that end, I would say, you know, you need to figure out what fills your tank and
yeah.
prioritize that. And for me, it's like twice a day I take my dog for a walk, you know, and about a mile and a half each time. And so, you know, I get 3 miles a day. So I get a physical exercise, but
Yeah.
just you know, we got a dog 8 years ago, got a golden retriever, and
Mhm.
she's crazy. And
Yeah. Yeah. They usually are. Yeah.
I've laughed more, and I think since we've had this dog, because she just sometimes just pure goofy.
Hmm.
But just getting out, getting some exercise, breathing some fresh air, and often, especially in the mornings when I walk the dog, it's just time for me to I go for a walk with God and my dog. Okay.
Hmm.
And it's just like you have somebody there you're talking to, and you know, you need to pay attention to the dog you do and carry back your conversation. And just having that structured into my day every day, you know, just that's part of something I do. And you know, other things, whatever fills your tank. So some people will be hobbies. I like reading, so reading's a big thing for me. Music's another one. Um, Sunday night, I actually just after my very busy week and day, I went to my home office here, my study, and I put on Danny Brooks, some rhythm and blues. The Christian guys, just you know, great music, and I
Hmm.
sat there for an hour and just listened to some music. You know that did something for me. You know, and so
Yeah.
just finding what it is that fills your tank, and
Hmm.
then make sure that you know. And part of that's our relationship with God and our wife and all those things, but find out what it is that fills you up. And if you're full on the inside, that's going to help go the distance, I think, over
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Excellent stuff. And I'm just glad that we've been able to touch base again. I hope we get to do this again because as usual, I've got a number of other questions I could ask, but time runs out. But that's all right. We'll just continue on. So,
Yeah.
thanks again, Paul, for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Ron. Have a good day.
Thanks.